So I'm sitting here bored, and since I don't have any shorts from a mystery cartoon or episodes of a current running Disney Channel animated series that I still have to review, and am absolutely not lying to myself, I decided, let's watch some Star Trek. There is no other franchise that I love to revisit more than Star Trek. Not to say that any Star Trek series is my favorite series of all time. That award goes to Buffy the Vampire Slayer. But in terms of fiction franchises, Star Trek has made a bigger impact on me than any other. Even the series that I don't think are as good, aka Voyager and Enterprise, I still enjoy revisiting, I still enjoy rewatching. In fact, on some days, Voyager is my favorite of the series just for how over the top and weird it is. All of that said though, with 5 series, not counting the new series, to choose from, I often have trouble deciding which episode to watch. Thankfully, the internet solved that problem for me with something called the Star Trek Randomizer. You can see it here, it connects directly to your Netflix account. You hit the play random episode button, and it takes you to a random episode of the show. Granted, this will only work for as long as Star Trek remains available on Netflix, but in the meantime, I thought, let's try out a new series on this channel, Random Star Trek, where once every week to 2 weeks, I click this button, and I review which episode comes up. This means that I will be free from reviewing them in context with other episodes, though if I do get either part of a two-parter, I will review both parts of the two-parter at the same time. So let's go ahead and see which episode I'm going to be talking about today. And click.
Captain's log, stardate 1512.2. Why does Spock want to take us to that one forbidden world in all the galaxy? His former captain, mutilated by a recent space disaster, and unable to speak or move.
I have never disobeyed your orders before, Captain. I know it is treachery against Captain Kirk, but I must do this.
No vessel, under any condition, emergency or otherwise, is to visit Talos 4.
And to do so is the only death penalty left on our books.
There's a false entry in the log right now which doesn't jive with the established facts. How do you explain that?
I can't, but to question Spock of all people. Doctor, as senior officer present, I present myself to you for arrest.
You're a perfect choice.
Captain! This is Mr. Spock. You'll learn next why returning Captain Pike to Talos 4 was worth risking my life and Captain Kirk's career. Join us then to see the conclusion of the incredible adventure on that forbidden planet.
Increase to full power!
Since you resist the present specimen, you now have a selection. Each of the 2 new specimens has qualities in her favor. You will find it an effective combination.
Don't, please, don't punish me!
You overlook the unpleasant alternative of punishment.
This is actually a fantastic place to start these reviews. For those who don't know, the original Star Trek series had 2 pilot episodes. The second pilot featured the crew mostly as we know them today, led by Captain Kirk with Spock as his first officer and science officer. Most of the other cast members were there in something resembling the roles that they would eventually have in the main series. It was a pretty action-packed episode, and did enough to bridge the gap between what television was at the time and what Gene Roddenberry saw that television could be, that it managed to both be picked up by a network and further Gene Roddenberry's vision. The first pilot, however, was something a bit different. The first pilot featured an entirely different crew led by Captain Christopher Pike, a man who, while he was not opposed to the call to action, had been through so much and seen so much that he was at the end of his rope, near retirement. He no longer felt that his place was on a bridge of one of these starships. He was more introspective, contemplative, and cerebral than Kirk was, at least initially. He also had a woman as his first officer, which was kind of a big no-no in that era, which might have contributed to the pilot not being picked up. Though at the end of the day, that's more speculation than anything else, so I'm not going to make any definitive statements. The interesting thing was, that original pilot, The Cage, while it's readily available to be seen by fans of the show today, was not readily available at the time. In fact, originally it wasn't even supposed to be part of the continuity of the original series. The second pilot featuring Kirk and his crew was meant to straight up replace it. However, as the first season of the show progressed and they realized they needed new plots for episodes and also ways to save money, Gene Roddenberry and his people made the choice retroactively to make the cage part of the continuity of the show, setting it 13 years before the second pilot. Leonard Nimoy's Spock, the only character in common between the two pilots, was used as a bridge between the two eras, and a new story was constructed around the idea of bringing the cage to fans of the show in the form of a clip show featuring clips that the fans had never seen. This served to save money the same way that a regular clip show would, and at the same time bring new footage to fans, to viewers, so that at the end of the day it didn't feel like a clip show at all. I was kind of spoiled. Obviously, I'm too young to have watched Star Trek first run. In fact, I watched Star Trek the most at my grandmother's house. My grandmother, on my mom's side, was a huge Star Trek fan, and actually owned a recording of The Cage. It was actually the first episode that I ever watched. When I came to this two-part episode, The Menagerie, which rehashes The Cage, it did feel like a conventional clip show to me. But it is very interesting that the unique nature of Star Trek as a show with two fully realized pilots was able to make use of that other, yet unseen pilot in this way. It was extremely clever, and as someone who really appreciates shows which take their format and take what is unique and special to them and does something interesting with it, I really love these two episodes. But that is mostly my own personal preference and my nostalgia talking. How good are these episodes just on their own? The Menagerie begins with the crew of the Enterprise being called to a planet-side starbase at behest of Captain Christopher Pike. He has been promoted above captain of an individual ship at this point. His promotion actually made way for Kirk's promotion to captain of the Enterprise. Kirk is excited to see him, and they expect Spock to be even more so, and yet, when they arrive, they are informed that not only did Pike never send a message to the Enterprise, but he simply can't. Pike was involved in an accident and is now bound to a chair, which can read his thoughts only so much as he is able to signal yes or no. He cannot move his body at all, is disfigured in constant pain, and is simply incapable of any complex forms of communication with anyone else. He's alive, but constantly suffering. And while our own medicine at this time would suggest that he should be able to communicate more than he does here, we do have to accept the premise that Pike is completely unable to produce any form of meaningful interactions. That is key to this plot working. As the episode progresses, we actually learn that it was Spock's doing bringing the Enterprise here, that he falsified a communique from Captain Pike. He knows something from his time serving under his old friend that he believes will give Pike some semblance of a life back again. Spock even goes so far as to falsify orders from Kirk, sending the Enterprise without the captain aboard to the forbidden planet Talos 4, a planet which, for undisclosed reasons, is so dangerous that to go there is punishable by death. Kirk and the Commodore of the space station, of course, do not take this lightly when they learn that Spock has taken Pike with him and effectively commandeered the Enterprise. They follow behind in a shuttlecraft. Shuttlecraft are, of course, very ill-suited to these long-range journeys, so Spock takes mercy and accepts Captain Kirk and the Commodore aboard. He turns himself over for arrest for mutiny, and demands that Kirk, the Commodore, and Pike sit in judgment of him in a court-martial-like situation. It is here that Spock tells the story of The Cage. Incredibly detailed footage is beamed into the ship from Talos 4. This has the added side effect of now putting everyone on the ship in equal danger, as they will all now be executed if things don't go well. But it does serve to explain to Kirk and the Commodore what exactly happened on that forbidden planet, and why Spock thinks that Pike could make a new life there. We are told the story of how Pike and a landing party are tricked to the surface by a call for help from a group of survivors who supposedly crashed there many years ago. There they meet a beautiful young woman among this group of older men, immediately drawing Pike's attention because, of course she does. This is a show from the 60s, after all. But we as the audience see that not all is what it seems, as a group of bald-headed aliens are watching this entire exchange. We learn soon that the young woman is the only person there who is real, that everyone else was some sort of elaborate illusion created by the bald-headed aliens, who promptly capture Captain Pike. He is taken down into a fortress behind these obviously real rocks, behind a door that the Enterprise crew simply can't penetrate no matter how much energy they direct towards it. Fitting for the title of the episode, Pike is put into a cage. Here, the bald-headed aliens observe him and make observations about him telepathically. This is how he learns that they have powerful mental abilities. They proceed to put him through various different scenarios to attempt to alternatively force or convince him to comply with their wishes, to breed with the young woman and create effectively a slave race of humans to serve these people. The rest of the stuff with Pike is an alternating series of illusions which build the world of Star Trek, or else tell us more about Pike as a character or about his past, all of which are very interesting and should be seen for yourself, and the efforts of the people back on the Enterprise attempting to save Pike. Once it's learned that he will not mate with the young woman who is a stranger to him, women are taken from the ship to offer as alternative options for mating. This, however, brings Pike, who up to this point has felt absolutely helpless and incapable of resisting these aliens, back in contact with other members of his crew. He's able to talk through some things, and eventually works out that these Telosians are so advanced mentally speaking, that the more angry and primitive thoughts and emotions that someone like Pike, someone like a human might have, actually serve to sort of inoculate a person against the mental abilities of these creatures. Up until now, the Telosian illusions have been perfect, but thanks to this new discovery, they are able to start seeing through them. They learn that their attempts to break through the aliens' defenses were actually successful, but the idea was simply planted in their heads that it wasn't. It's a very interesting and effective twist that these creatures are not as powerful as they seem in anything but mind. This gives the crew of the Enterprise a defense against them and a means of escaping. This is when Pike makes his big play. He has his number one, set a phaser weapon to overload, something which will destroy a large portion of the surface of the planet in this region. No longer can the Telosians see within his mind to know if he's bluffing. They are forced to retreat back underground and let him go. Though they do reveal to him the truth of the young woman who he has been spending so much time with lately. There was a crash on the planet. She was the sole survivor, and the Telosians, having never seen a human before, were not able to put her back together. She no longer feels like she can return to human society, and so what they actually wanted for her was a companion. It's never outright stated that they don't still intend to create a slave race of humans, but it's heavily implied that all they were trying to do was care for their surrogate child, that they just think so differently from us that it didn't come off that way. That on some level they didn't even think like they could ask us the question. Pike still leaves, of course, which concludes the story of the cage. This is when we learn that the Commodore himself was actually a Telosian illusion, put in place to act as a foil for Kirk throughout these proceedings, so that he would continue to pursue the truth. The Telosians now communicate with him directly. It's revealed that they can give Pike an illusionary existence which feels entirely real. Because their mental influence reaches so far, charges against Spock and the rest of the Enterprise crew will never go through. They can go to Talos 4 without any negative repercussions. This is when we learn pretty much for sure that they didn't intend to create a slave race. They have been projecting their thoughts over light years distance. If they really wanted to create a slave race of humans, they could, easily, simply by reaching out and creating the right illusions to draw more humans to their planet. Pike returns to the planet, and we see that he will be given some semblance of a happily ever after. There are some obvious problems with this episode that just stem from how old it is, from the era in which it was created. The idea that a mutilated and deformed woman wouldn't have any place in human society, especially after what we learned from the Society of Humans in Star Trek later on, is absolutely absurd. And the idea that medical science at the time couldn't have helped her at all to reclaim something of her old quality of life is pretty silly too. We see ridiculous medical miracles all throughout this series. So at the end of the day, the ending does come off a bit like, she's ugly now, so nobody would want her, and that's kind of sexist, but the 60s were kind of sexist. I know that's not an excuse, but it is a reason, and we do have to look at things in context of the time. Obviously, her ending with Pike is far more limited than the kind of life which she could have had elsewhere, but at least she and Pike both get some semblance of a happy existence. Though I will freely admit that if she were in even worse shape, something similar to how Pike ends up in this episode, unable to move and only to think, it would have worked a lot better. Still, The Cage is a pretty good episode. It's not fantastic, it's not the best that Star Trek has ever done, but it's definitely a lot of fun. The props, the costumes, even some of the sets even look just primitive enough compared to the sets, the costumes, and the props that we see in the series proper, that it does work as being set 13 years before the rest of the series. The framing device with Spock's court-martial isn't the most creative thing I've ever seen by a wide margin, but it does serve to tell this story which, as I said before, at the time, was not readily available to fans. The Telosians themselves were interesting, very alien-looking, with very cool prosthetics which actually throbbed and moved as they thought. They were all played by women, as I'm sure you could see, but what might not have come across in this video is that they were actually voiced by men, giving them a very alien quality to their performance. Not only did the voices that came out of these characters not feel like they should come out of these characters, but there always felt like there was a bit of a delay between the expressions on their faces and the words that came out of their mouths, and while of course that's just the nature of redubbing a character like this, in this context it actually works to add a quality to the characters which wouldn't be there otherwise. The whole thing about going to the planet being punishable by death is a bit odd, especially in the context of the world of Star Trek, but considering how powerful the Telosians are known to be, I can kind of understand why the governments of the Federation wouldn't want people going back there. I'm sure some higher-up government official or admiral in Starfleet who knows who these people are and what they're capable of has nightmares about what they could accomplish if they could get off their planet. However, as I said before, it's now made clear by this episode that they don't actually have any malicious intention. I'm wondering, in fact, if Kirk will relay that back to Starfleet and the law will be changed. Unfortunately, the nature of Star Trek as a very unserialized show means that we will never find out. It's also quite interesting seeing the juxtaposition between portrayals of Spock in these two episodes, in these two eras of episodes. Pike's Spock was very much more emotional, as he was much more comfortable with his captain. Whereas despite the fact that Kirk and Spock are very good friends, Spock to Kirk is much more reserved. Again, this obviously is just due to different portrayals of the character, different interpretations of the character from one pilot to the next, from effectively one series to the next, but it's worked in such a way that you can believe that Spock used to be like this. Spock overall is the main character of these two episodes. We get to see just how far he would go for someone he cares so much about. And at the end of the day, making Spock effectively the antagonist of these two episodes was brilliant, because up until this point, Spock was the most reliable, most loyal member of the crew. Turning everything around and making him the antagonist pulls the rug out from beneath the feet of the audience and makes for a very effective twist and surprise. I also really love the scene where he creates the fake orders from Kirk. There's no Star Trek-y technobabble, as this was far too early for us to see something like that. Instead, it's just very simple and effective. It's an interesting scene because we get to see how clever Spock is, but it's also a tense scene because we don't understand what he's doing or why he's doing it. Overall, I wouldn't say that these are my favorite episodes of the show by a wide margin, but as far as Star Trek episodes go, and especially as far as Star Trek clip shows go, this is a very strong pair of episodes. Speaking of the true cleverness of the crew working on this show at the time. Not to mention how effective it was as serving as fan service, delivering this episode to the fans that otherwise they weren't going to be able to see. These are a well above average pair of episodes, and if you are a Star Trek fan who hasn't seen them, I would definitely recommend giving them a watch. I also really like the title of these two episodes, The Menagerie, as opposed to the title of the original pilot, The Cage. In that episode, we saw things mostly from the perspective of Pike, who was trapped in a literal and figurative cage. The room with the glass wall and the illusory prisons created by the Telosians, respectively. But in these two episodes, as we know that other characters are watching these things along with us, that cage suddenly becomes a menagerie. It's a pretty clever play on words. As per usual, guys, though, I'd like to know if you have seen The Menagerie Parts 1 and 2. What do you think of these episodes? Let's get a discussion going in the comments section down below. Either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.